Okay, hey guys, it's Tori.
And this is Yanni.
And we're here today at a restaurant that plays live music, which is very fitting of the article that we chose to talk about today, written and published by National Geographic, called Alternative Kyoto: How Japan's Culture Capital Became a Hotspot for Live Music. So we're going to touch on a couple things, such as how it became a hotspot for live music to begin with, what Irish music has to do with Kyoto in the first place, other types of music, music we hear at clubs, a dance band here in Japan, culture shock, and just the way the article was written and articulated and how it communicated intercultural differences. But to begin, do you have anything to note?
I do. So one thing I want to touch on that the article really touched on deeply was the fact that there's a lot of international music in Kyoto because it's a hub spot for this place. And one of the biggest examples is that Irish music is actually extremely common here in terms of forms of live music. There's many Irish pubs or just regular bars that play a lot of Irish music, which is surprising for Kyoto. But there are many other forms of music that are played live, such as
so they also have somewhat of Japanese rock bands, punk bands, EDM music. A lot of experimental music can be seen even just at the hotel that's right next to CIEE. That's like, they have a ton of live music that just people from basically all over the world come and like perform, which is very, very interesting. But so Irish pubs, crazy. When I think of Kyoto, I do not think of Irish music whatsoever, but that kind of plays into the preconceived notion of what I thought Japan had to begin with, because I don't know about you, but I would never think to come to Kyoto to listen to Irish live music.
I agree, and I think this ties into what we learned in class about culture shock, and how an example of culture shock can be that you have certain expectations for a country, and then you come to the country and there are things that are different. And I think this live music, especially international live music, is just a great example of this, how people don't normally think of Kyoto as a small city as like a hub spot for music. Especially people think of Japan as a very traditional place that does very Japanese things, but we see lots of examples of jazz and EDM and rock and Irish music and all sorts of bars and clubs, and I just think that's a great example of how every culture can be a little bit different than we perceive.
Yeah, and the article touched on that in the 1970s they actually had a wave of people come in and introduce jazz music as well. So jazz is a bigger, genre of music that can be seen in the U.S. or Europe, but in the 1970s it was really introduced in Kyoto, and thus made a very, very, very famous jazz bar, and introduced a big jazz music scene to the area. And it kind of, I don't know, it's interesting to see, because also, again, I would never think to come to Kyoto for jazz music. Like, when I thought of Japan, I always thought of J-pop, idol groups, things of that nature, but but specifically, Kyoto has like a ton of just smaller populations of different types of vocalists and different types of lesser known music artists and music genres. So yeah, I think another very, very, very important thing to touch on is the I guess you could say Japan is a very homogenous country, very homogenous community, because it's on an island, but because of music, it's attracted a lot of people, especially Kyoto. One quote I really liked was, "Kyoto's a small, deep city." People's connections are spread like roots. You can make a community easily here. The cost of living is also cheaper than other major cities, which is why so many experimental musicians live here. That touches on a lot of things. I think the biggest thing is the experimental music and why it attracts so many people from around the world.
Yeah, and so tying to that, a big example of our big reasoning behind why Kyoto became so popular is actually very interesting. There's a big history behind the fact that there was actually a dance ban in Japan for a very, very long time, which is very interesting to hear because after midnight, clubs used to not allow, there used to be a lot of restrictions around live music and dancing and all sorts of things. And in the 2010s, there actually was an explosion of arrests and just police stops that happened due to a lot of these clubs and the just inability to go past midnight they called it a dance ban. But just any sort of like clubs or live music after midnight was illegal until 2014. Which is just extremely shocking and just shows how, different nations can have very different set of cultures.
Yeah, and not even just that. It's like a lot of times people think of dance as a way to kind of express your individuality and kind of express who you are as an individual. So kind of taking that and not letting people dance anymore. I don't know, says a lot about the establishment here in Japan. But, yeah, touching on individuality, Japan and especially Kyoto has just brought a lot of people from different parts of the world here. And I think the biggest thing to know is Kyoto is a place that has, I guess, brought together people that have been marginalized in society, people who are considered different, who don't follow normal Japanese ways, and they find community here, which I found very beautiful. And I don't know, it makes it a little less lonely because at the end of the day, we're all seeking places to fit in and find a sense of community. And yeah, I don't know, thinking about like Hofstede and just like, I guess individualist versus collectivist culture, like even despite being considered a collectivist culture, you can see a lot of individualism as well. So I don't know, I think it's very interesting.
But touching on that, I do also think that the live music scene and just the whole bar and club scene in Kyoto is very driven from collectivism because you see a lot of izakayas. A lot of times, in the U.S., you see people going out to clubs, trying to impress people or trying to, meet with other people, where in Kyoto you do see a little bit more of like close-tied friendship in terms of izakayas, and the way that people go out is a little bit more tied into deep collectivism. But disregarding that, I have a question for you, Tori. What are your thoughts on the way that this article is communicated?
So honestly, it was a little hard to read at first because it was a lot of like word salad, but I think it did a good job like conveying the bigger message of like the different types of music, how it brings people together, and how I guess it is in contrast to I guess the type of community, the overall community that kind of Japan wants to be seen as like a collectivist, but in reality, like it's a little more. Some aspects are a little more individualist, but yeah, I don't know. There's always like, I guess there's aspects that are individualist, and then there's also aspects that are collectivist. So highlighting that it's not just one thing, but it can be both as well. What did you think of how the message was conveyed?
I definitely agree with your analysis. I like that it touched on those points that we learned in class that we can easily reflect on. One kind of problem that I had with the way that the article was communicated is is the first like two paragraphs are just explaining the Irish pubs and the Irish music. So it is a bit of a like the spiral that we learned where it's very broad in the beginning and then they start to get more specific and we only hear about the dance band at the very end, where I think that that is a key part of the article. So maybe that should have been highlighted a little bit more. But the article overall definitely expressed a lot of different reasonings and
that was our analysis on that article behind Kyoto's live music scene. I hope everyone can maybe, if you're here for 3 blocks, if you're here for another couple days, I hope you guys go out and maybe experience a little more of the live music scene and then tell us what you think. Do you have anything else to add?
I love ICL.
I love ICL too. Woo!
That's the end of the podcast. Thank you guys. Nice work, man. Nice work.